Yaffee program on WVNN.
Welcome back, second hour of the Yaffee program, right here on News Talk 770 AM 92.5 FM WVNN. You know who I am. You know how the show works. You know how to text in. All that stuff. I don't even know why I have to remind you. You're all diehard fans. You know all of this by heart. But welcome to the show. So one thing I talked about on the show earlier this week, Kevin Warsh, who is the guy who is Trump's pick to head the Federal Reserve. Is it a good pick? I mean, some people think it's going to be pretty good. Other people are worried about how it could affect the economy. Usually it matters where your stance is on politics in general. But I think it could be a transformational pick that could have a generational impact. So I want to talk about this with an expert right now. Joining me on the show is E.J. Antoni. He is one of the chief economists with the Heritage Foundation. EJ, thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So, yeah, we hadn't known for a while who Trump was going to pick. It seemed like it was between Kevin Warsh and Kevin Hassett. But now Trump has made his pick. What do you think about it?
I love it. Absolutely love it. In fact, if you had asked me this about a year ago was when I first started discussing Warsh, actually, and he was my favorite back then. And even though he was only at 1 or 2% in the betting market, every time I sat down and talked with the guy, I liked him more and more. And at this point, I've had the opportunity now to sit down and even have dinner with him on several occasions and really do deep dives into monetary policy. And I got to say, the guy knows his stuff. He is a genuine expert. And I know a lot of people have been talking about his resume in terms of how long it is, and he worked at this place and that place, these different investment banks, and he previously was on the Fed and Ivy League educated, blah, blah, blah. Honestly, all that's nice, but it's not even the most impressive thing about him. The most impressive thing about him is that in the past, at key moments in history, especially during times like financial crises, the man knew what to do. Now, he was ignored, unfortunately, at many of those inflection points, but the point is he was still correct. This isn't simply Monday morning quarterbacking where the guy is saying, back during the global financial crisis, we should have done X, Y, and Z. No, the guy was there during the GFC. He was there during the mortgage meltdown, and he was saying we need to be doing X, Y, and Z. Unfortunately, he was ignored, but history has proven him correct.
Well, can you give me some examples you had mentioned during the housing meltdown? What did he want to do that was different?
Well, one of the things that he observed was after the initial round of bank bailouts, the Fed should not continue with this huge money printing spree that it was on and keeping rates artificially low. In fact, he said, no, now is the time to start getting rates back to normal. If we keep up with this money printing and if we continue to have rates artificially low right now, we're going to create asset bubbles. And that's exactly what happened. You had this big stock market boom, which sounds great at first, but the problem is you're not actually creating real value. You're just increasing prices. Look at what's happened over the last several years with home prices. In a lot of markets, they've basically doubled, except the houses aren't twice as big and they're not twice as nice. The quality hasn't doubled. It's just the fact that the price has. This is this whole phenomenon of inflation. And just like the Fed created a housing bubble, which ultimately led to a housing crash, they had previously created a dot-com bubble, which also led to a dot-com crash around the year 2000. And so Warsh has correctly observed that the Fed should not be creating these bubbles in the first place. And he's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, you know a lot more about him than I do, but from what I was reading, he is someone who really wants to bring the dollar back to stability. Like we have had the value of the dollar just go down and down and down. And he believes that it really should be the main focus of the Federal Reserve. It seems like the Federal Reserve has gone into other things. They really care more about employment and boosting the overall economy. And his point, which I think he's correct, seems to be, no, the Federal Reserve's main job is to have a stable dollar. And overall, that is actually what helps the economy in the long run. Would you agree with that?
Oh, of course, absolutely. Look, at the end of the day, the Fed really can't do anything to create jobs. It can create the appearance of that, but it can't actually generate wealth. It can't actually generate or produce innovation, and it can't generate jobs. That's an absolute myth. It's an excuse that is often used for the Fed to print money to cover government deficit spending. But that's not in the Fed's power to do that. What the Fed can do, and unfortunately what it has failed to do under Powell, is to keep the value of the dollar stable, exactly what you were just describing. And instead of focusing on price stability, instead of focusing on a stable dollar, what the Fed under Powell has been doing is mission creep, you might call it. They've been wandering into other fields where they're worried about ESG and DEI and all this other left-wing garbage, quite frankly, where they're trying to force banks to make loans to people and to businesses based not on whether it would be a good loan or not on whether it's a good or bad default risk, but on whether or not this is a project that is going to be fueled by solar and wind or fueled by coal, nuclear, and natural gas. I mean, it's just absolutely absurd that they would be doing these things, that they would be stress testing banks, for example, based on things like DEI quotas. It's absolutely wrong. It is monetary mismanagement. And unfortunately, that is the wrong-headed direction which Powell has taken the Fed, and Warsh represents a course correction away from that, bringing the Fed back to basics, back to sound monetary policy.
Speaking with E.J. Antoni, he's an economist with the Heritage Foundation. We're talking about President Donald Trump's pick to head the Fed. He's still got to be confirmed by the Senate, but Trump wants Kevin Warsh to do it, and Warsh seems to be an inflation hawk and seems to be someone who wants to reform the Fed back to its original purpose, which I tend to think is a good thing. Now, Trump has complained that interest rates have been too high. He calls Jerome Powell too late Powell. And he makes a good point because we had inflation problems under Biden. We could see it was coming, but Powell and the rest of them said it was just transitory. Well, it wasn't. And eventually they had to really raise interest rates, but it was kind of too late. And now Trump thinks, it's too late to start lowering them. But what do you think?
Well, here's part of the problem. What Powell has done is been hyper-focused on the interest rate while ignoring several other key tools that the Fed has at its disposal. The Fed's regulatory arm is massive and overgrown and has been inflicting a lot of financial pain on not only just the financial sector, but the American economy more broadly, including American households. The Fed has an absolutely oversized balance sheet. Its balance sheet is so large, it's as if the Fed thinks we're in the middle of another financial crisis. But then you look at interest rates, and interest rates are high enough that it's like the Fed thinks inflation is still running out of control. So this is where Warsh talks about the Fed having the whole policy mix precisely backwards. And again, he's right. What the Fed should be doing is drastically reducing that balance sheet to create deflationary pressure in the economy. In other words, put downward pressure on inflation. And at the same time, we do have room to lower interest rates, provided they are getting that balance sheet down. And again, there are a lot of other policy tools that the Fed has at its disposal. It needs to adjust the interest on reserve policy when it comes to banks. It needs to return us to a reserve requirement. It needs to, again, really get into deregulation in terms of the financial sector and roll back the overreach that we've seen for more than a decade now since the GFC. So again, Powell has been hyper-focused on one policy tool and is ignoring or misusing all the others, and it is to the American economy's detriment.
And why do you think that is? I mean, what is motivating him? Is it really just politics? I mean, why would he not want to use some of those other tools, you think?
It's a good question. I mean, Powell is a creature of Wall Street, so maybe that has to do with it. This is speculation on my part. But Powell's policies, as much as they've inflicted a lot of pain on Main Street, they've been a windfall to Wall Street. They think of it. The Fed is currently paying banks hundreds of millions of dollars per day, not an exaggeration, to not lend money. In other words, the banks are lending this money to the Fed instead of lending it to mom and pop small businesses, instead of lending it to families trying to get a mortgage, instead of lending it to countless consumers who have credit card debt, whatever the case may be. You name it, the Fed is basically competing with anybody trying to borrow money. So banks are choosing to lend to the Fed at a risk-free rate of return instead of lending to Main Street and instead of lending to the Treasury. It's not just pushing up interest rates on credit cards, student loans, auto loans, and mortgages, although it is. It's also pushing up the interest rate paid on the national debt, which represents another expense to taxpayers. And so all of these different policies by Powell, again, I can't emphasize it enough. Not only has it destroyed the value of your dollar, but it has hurt you in countless other ways as well.
Do you think the Federal Reserve has too much power in general?
Oh, absolutely. The Fed has turned into a total monster. It is, first of all, it had too much power even when it was created back in 1913, over 100 years ago, but it has only increased that power and, more importantly, centralized the power in D.C. When the Fed was first created, the board in D.C. actually had a minority voting share, if you will, and the regional banks, the 12 regional banks around the country, they had the majority share, and today it's precisely the opposite. Unfortunately, not only did the progressives in 1913 under Woodrow Wilson create the abomination that is the Fed, but then the progressives under FDR really put it on steroids and, again, centralized that power in D.C. and increased the Fed's power even further.
E.J. Antoni, he is with the Heritage Foundation. Real quick, before I let you go, I did want to ask, do you expect some decent economic growth this year? I've seen several different takes on this. Some people think, no, we might have very weak growth, but I've seen some people predict 5% GDP growth maybe at some point this year. What do you think?
I would not be surprised if we get quarterly reports with a 5 handle. In other words, 5.x%. I would not be surprised at all. And all of the folks I have noticed who are saying we're going to have terrible growth this year, it's shaping up to be a bad year, recession's around the corner, blah, 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 blah. These were the exact same folks who said that the second half of last year was going to be terrible. Well, guess what? We had over 4% growth in the third quarter of last year, and the fourth quarter is currently predicted to also be over 4% growth. So the idea that we are somehow going to just, I guess, bottom out this year is really silly. And I think you need no further proof for that than if you just look at all of those folks, their predictions from last year, how wrong they were about that too.
E.J. Antoni, one of the chief economists for the Heritage Foundation. Really appreciate you coming on the show today. As always, I hope to talk to you again in the future.
Hey, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, back in a moment on the Yaffee program.
You're listening to Yaffee on WVNN.
You didn't start a business just to keep the lights on. You're here to sell more today than yesterday. You're here to win. Lucky for you, Shopify built the best converting checkout on the planet. Like the just one tapping, ridiculously fast acting, sky-high sales stacking, champion of checkouts. That's the good stuff right there. So if your business is in it to win it, win with Shopify. Start your free trial today at shopify.com/win.
Mic Drop.
You ready?
Let's do it. Hosted by former Navy SEAL Mike Ridland. It's unfiltered.
You know, you go to the sound of the gun, bam, you're gone.
It's weird. I mean, I've had so many near-death experiences.
It's raw.
I love this country. I offered my life to serve this nation and protect its people.
The question, what's the meaning of life? And to me, it just boils down to one single word, which is purpose.
Mic Drop. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Hi, I'm Joe Saul-Sehy, host of the Stacking Benjamins podcast. Every week, we talk personal finance trends.
I think it's tough finding like a stock certificate from 1987 in Grandpa's drawer. Wait until you need the Face ID to unlock Cash App.
It's so sad what money does to people.
It happens. That's why you don't tell anybody what you got.
That guy had the brilliant idea. I don't want my relatives to know how much money I have. So every time I go to Thanksgiving, I ask them if I can borrow more.
Stealth wealth.
Stacking Benjamins. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.